around the corner and the offseason goes on as we continue with our positional reviews. This time shifting to the defense. Welcome into another Strictly Stripes offseason edition of this podcast. Muhammad Ahmad here with you with Andrew Gillis and Mike Isaac to kick off another week. We wrapped up the offense last week. We tied it up with the offensive line. I said we would get to the secondary, but I figured, hey, go from the O-line to D-line. That's a good little pivot. I think it's good to kind of stay on course with that. And like last week, we'll talk about the edge rushers and then focus on the interior, how they fared, what the future looks like, what needs to change and why. And, of course, just to jump right into it with the edge rushers, kind of starting off with Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson. And, guys, I just want to ask you guys first off, before I get to Hendrickson, because I think there's a lot to say with him, even though Sam Hubbard missed a game with that calf/ankle injury in December, 6.5 sacks, a forced fumble, still the most in his career in a season. And this is even after missing one game. How well do you think Sam Hubbard played, given he's on an extension deal right now? And what do you want to see improve with him specifically in the pass rush going into 2023?
I think the number one thing that you can kind of point to with Hendrickson and Hubbard is that, their numbers are never really kind of the full story with how good they played. You kind of hear that about, when you talk to Lou Anarumo and different guys in the building, you see that when you look at, some advanced stuff like pass rush win rates and things like that. They really kind of outperformed their sack numbers and the kind of how much they got home. And I think that matters. I mean, when you have a guy who's getting 8 sacks, that's good. When you have a guy who's getting 6.5, that's good. I think the number one thing you would want to see is you got to have maybe more than 14 combined. If you can get more than that, you can really start to do some creative things otherwise defensively. But I mean, aside from that, that's kind of cherry picking because those two guys are really good. They do a really nice job in terms of their assignments, not just in the pass game, but in the run game too. You hear guys talk about that a lot. So, it's hard to ask for a ton more from those guys. They're not Aaron Donald, they're not, elite Von Miller Hall of Fame pass rushers, but they're really, really good. And I think that is, that's, what you're going to get from those guys, and what you're going to get is really solid production. And, it's hard to complain about.
Yeah, but the problem for the Bengals is they're paying for elite production almost on the defensive line, and they're not necessarily getting it on the pass rush. I mean, the salaries. I don't know if you've seen the kind of the cap spending. Yeah. $60 million towards the defensive line, and that's towards 4 players for 2023, and that's ranked second highest in the NFL at the position. And they just need to get to the quarterback more. They can't. The Bengals really can't make any moves. I feel like at the position without cutting somebody. Cutting somebody doesn't really make sense in terms of Hendrickson. Hendrickson and DJ Reader both have cap savings, but Reader's not going anywhere. And Hendrickson, cutting him, his salary wouldn't allow you to replace 2 guys. So I do think the production needs to be better, just in terms of what they're spending at the position. I mean, it's a huge amount of money to be at the bottom of the league in terms of sack productions, and their pressures were down according to Pro Football Focus and other sites that kind of keep track of those. Down about 30 to 40 from last year. So I do think they need a little more production out of that group just because of how much they're getting paid.
I do want to make a quick correction on Hubbard. If you include his postseason sack on Patrick Mahomes, that's the second most in his career. He had 8.5 his second season. But I want to ask you this, Mike, because you make an interesting point. So, you have Hendrickson, back-to-back Pro Bowls. So that's the team record for most sacks in the season, during the year they went to the Super Bowl. But you say you want to see more, like, production. I mean, is there kind of like a number or sort of like a quota of like how many sacks or pressures they have to hit? Like I know Andrew said you want to see ideally 14 plus combined. Like what does that look like for the Bengals, just given how much cash they're shoveling out, if you had to kind of just predict it?
As a group, I was looking at the sacks per attempt. When it's less than 5%, teams rarely make the playoffs. The Bengals were right at that line. They were at the bottom of the league in most statistical, measurements of pass rush. And it just needs to be better. I don't think you can set a number. I mean, that's sort of arbitrary, but just more consistent and impact the quarterback more. I thought they went quiet for long stretches. I think injuries did play a role. How much missing DJ Reader for that lengthy stretch with the knee injury, if he's back healthy and has a full season, will that just take care of it? I'm not sure, but I think it needs to be more consistent than they were last year, more like the 2021 season.
Andrew, what do you think? Does Mike make a point, or do you think maybe he's being a little bit too critical of specifically Hendrickson? Like, where do you think, the truth kind of lies within that, in your opinion?
No, he's not being too critical, because you do got to get home. I think when you kind of look at their play together, they're good quality defensive ends, but like Mike said, you're paying Trey Hendrickson a cap hit in 2023 of $15.4 million. You're paying Sam Hubbard $9.9 million. So you're paying a lot of money for you're paying $25 million for these guys. You need some kind of presence off the edge. And I'm not saying they don't give it to you, but you do need to get to the quarterback more than they have been. Because again, you've got $15 million in DJ Reader, and we'll get to them in a minute, but you've got $10 million in BJ Hill. Like Mike went through the numbers, like if you're going to invest that much in a defensive line, that's what sinks teams. That is kind of what hurts teams as you kind of look at the salary cap and the things that as things kind of evolve with Joe Burrow's contract. It's not we paid a really good player a lot of money. It's we paid a group a lot of money that's not giving us the production that amount of money would indicate. So you've got to get more pass rush, and I don't want to place it all on Hendrickson and Hubbard. This obviously can go down to BJ Hill, and if you want to get into some of the reserves, Zach Carter, Cam Sample, you can Joseph Osai, you can kind of go down the list here and say, okay, you need more from these guys. You got to get after the quarterback more. Because, the game is a passing game, and if you can get after the passer and defend the pass, you're going to win more often than not. And if you're talking about a team that is going to lose Jesse Bates, you're going to lose maybe some of your depth in the secondary. What if you have to play some younger guys? That's not a combination where you want to have, you don't want to have a pass rush for. You want to be able to get after the quarterback and kind of give those guys a little bit of a break and not have so much pressure and so much of the game come down to them.
And that's the thing. Like you said, I agree with you. It's a pass-first league. It's a pass-heavy league. And that's why you pay guys like that. Like, I know this is an extreme example because I think he's the highest-paid defensive end, but Myles Garrett, 5 years, $125 million. He's with Cleveland until, 2026? But that's why you pay a guy like that, because he even makes guys like Joe Burrow miserable. But here's the thing. Like you said, they're not paying one guy all that money like him or Aaron Donald. You're paying two guys pretty well. Like Sam Hubbard got a $40 million extension. Hendrickson's we just talked about his numbers. He's getting paid, and he's got 2 years left on his deal. But here's the thing with Hendrickson, though. You have 2 years left with him. Hubbard's going to be there at least through, I think, 2025, according to Spot Track. So Hubbard's not going in it for a while, but with Hendrickson, you got 2 years left with him. I don't want to treat, 2023 as like a make or break year, but to that point, in terms of the draft and or free agency, how much do you start preparing for a potential future without Trey Hendrickson? Because come 2024, with the Joe Burrow extension era that we're in, I don't know that the Bengals can pay him, come that time. So do you start planning for that now? And if so, what does that kind of look like?
I think you have to start planning for post anything in a salary cap era, especially one when you're going to pay a quarterback like $50 million. Like you need a constant pipeline of young players that you can replace for cheap, because you mentioned Hendrickson's deal. We'll get to this when we talked about the interior lineman, but DJ Reader's going into a contract year. That's going to matter. You're paying him $15+ million. You maybe staring down the gun of losing one of the better interior run defenders and interior defensive tackles in the league, and you're going to lose him if you do lose him after 2023. That's not going to help your defensive ends. You got to have a constant pipeline rolling here, because Hubbard's going to make $9 million, then $10 million, then $11 million. Then what happens? Like, is Joseph Osai ready? You still have Cam Sam. Like, you've got to keep a pipeline rolling with these guys, these younger players. That's why it's so crucial to develop 4th and 5th and 6th round picks, because as you develop them, if one guy develops into a starter, great. Then if you need a salary cap crunch, it makes it a little bit easier to swallow if you have to let Trey Hendrickson walk in free agency or let Sam Hubbard walk in free agency. Although as painful as that might sound, that's the realities of the business.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Hendrickson is a huge cap. The possibility of cutting him goes up significantly next year. I think he's scheduled to make like 17, and his dead cap money is only 2.5.
Correct.
So that would mean saving like $15 million. So, I think that you've got to start looking at it now. And I don't know how you're running out of draft capital when you talk about some of these, because they're so limited in what they can do in free agency. But at the same time, I mean, it's now or never, right? I mean, I know Joe Burrow says their window's, forever, but I mean, I'd be all in and trying to get an impact player in terms of a pass rusher. I think defensive tackle you can sort of build maybe for the future, but I'd be all in to try to get, like, if you can get one more pass rusher on this team, I think you'd really, I'd be in good shape in terms of that rotation and trying to impact quarterbacks. You could hope for a bounce back year from those guys as a group a little bit, but I think it would help, and I think it would make this team much more dangerous defensively.
And speaking of, touching on the future, before we get into those interior rushers like you guys mentioned, I mean, you mentioned Joseph Osai, you mentioned Cam Sample. People might focus on what Osai did in the AFC Championship, but even then, he had one of the best games of his life. Zach Taylor called his sack on Patrick Mahomes in the regular season, the hustle of the century. How impressed are you guys with Osai? Like, the Bengals, I'd imagine, will rely on him a lot more next year. What was so impressive about him, and what does the ceiling look like for a guy like that? And same with Cam Sample. Do you think Cam Sample needs to show more consistency, or does he kind of have a high ceiling like Joseph Osai? Like, where do you think those guys stand going into next year?
I mean, they're rotation players. I don't know necessarily that, they did anything consistently enough to sort of not want to try to pursue somebody that can get to the quarterback more consistently. I think that you need a very specific skill set, and I don't know that those guys did that on a consistent enough basis to sort of say, like, yeah, they're the future.
Yeah,
right.
And I mean, you could never have enough pass rushers. You could never have enough guys that can get after the quarterback. So you need those guys to develop. But yeah, I'm not sure that you have seen a ton from them to say, okay, that guy is a bona fide every down defensive end, or defensive tackle. Like, you need some stuff to happen for those guys to turn into that. So yeah, you just haven't seen enough from them right now.
So let's imagine a scenario where 2023 rolls around. Trey Hendrickson's a cap casualty, like you mentioned. You save $15 million. Do you let a guy like that walk and just hope that Joseph Osai or Cam Sample could be the next Hendrickson, or do you think that's a bit of a stretch? Or is
ideally you have
stretch.
Go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was just saying I would think that they would have, next year, if they don't do something this year, they'll be looking for free agent or something. I don't think that they would go into hard to say right now, but I mean in 2 years, unless they make some sort of huge jump, I don't think that they would be the guys next.
Yeah.
Who are some potential draft picks before we go into a break, like from the edge rusher position? Who do you guys think of that could be that extra piece, like you mentioned, Mike? Like, are there any names from the draft prospects that stick out to you guys?
Will Anderson.
I think Andrew looked at that today.
Will Anderson from Alabama. And one of the guys who I'm fascinated by is defensive end Andre Carter from Army. He's 6'7" and he's 260 pounds, and he's got freakish athleticism. There's a bunch of reasons why this guy is a really unique story. Obviously, there's the Army aspect where there's been the whole fight of him deferring his service, and originally it looked like he wasn't going to be able to. Now it sounds like he just needs a waiver and he's going to be good to play. He's a dark horse to be Army's first round pick since 1947. You're talking about a player who really didn't pop until the last year or two. He didn't really show that he was, this type of caliber player until the last year or two. So I think that I sneakily makes some sense for the Bengals at the end of round 1 because it's a little bit in the Dax Hill mold because, okay, if you can get a guy in there like an Andre Carter and say, okay, all we need you to do right now is rush the passer on third down. You're going to come in and play on the interior on third down, or we're going to take Trey Hendrickson off the field when he needs a breather. You can play him situationally. You get an extra pass rusher in there, and you kind of develop him because you always worry about that if you're talking about a prospect that's kind of like Khalil Mack. I know that's a stretch, but he came from Buffalo. You worry about a guy transferring at that level because not everybody is Khalil Mack. You need some kind of there is a learning curve going from college football to the NFL, especially if you're not going from an Alabama or Georgia, an Ohio State type of school. So I'm fascinated by what happens to him. There's a couple names on the inside. Brian Brzee from Clemson is a big defensive tackle. I think that he can kind of do some fun things for you on the interior. There's a couple different guys. Isaiah Foskey in the second round, third round. I think he didn't really help himself this year at Notre Dame. People kind of thought he was a tweener first-round pick at this time last year, and he didn't come out. Now you got a guy who's Notre Dame's all-time sack leader. He's really productive, but he's not going to be the worry that I would have if I was the Bengals is that he's not going to be your number one, oh, my God, this guy's getting 14 sacks a year, which it kind of sounds like you need. And it kind of say, everybody wants, but if you're going to lose a Hendrickson in a year or two, you need somebody to come in and play really well and be able to put up 8, 9, 10 sacks. So there's a lot of interesting names that you can kind of monitor here. And I think I'm starting to think of defensive end as a little bit not as pressing as the offensive line position, specifically the offensive tackle position, because at offensive tackle, you might need somebody to play week 1 if La'el Collins isn't going to be ready. Like, you're going to need some immediate help there. With defensive end, you got Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson there. You're chilling for 2023. Now, obviously, injuries can happen and things like that, but you're good for 2023. Beyond, we'll see. So I think you can really sit at a best player available type position, and if you think Andre Carter or one of these guys can come in and you got to use them as a development year, so be it.
That's a good analysis. Mike, anything to add to that?
Just that I view it as you don't want – they've been drafting kind of developmental prospects up front for the last couple of years, and I think they want somebody that if they, you go for a pass rusher, get somebody that could make an impact now. And I know you have some time if you kind of view it as a 2-year project, but just in terms of, your Super Bowl aspirations, wanting somebody that can step in this fall more in the mold of a Cam Taylor-Britt where you got, just take off and not sort of give them that gap year like Dax Hill had.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, Andrew, Andre Carter, he's not related to the Andre Carter, is he? The guy that played defensive end for the Redskins and Patriots?
Yeah, he's his son.
Oh, that's his son? Okay, I was wondering about that.
I believe it's his son. Because it's Andre Carter the second.
So who I guess the first one would have to be his dad. I was wondering about that because I heard the name, but I never looked into that, so I didn't know if you knew. But I like all of that. I like one guy, BJ Ojulari. I just kind of wanted to mention that because his brother Aziz played at Georgia, plays for the Giants, so that's a name that kind of sticks out. I don't know if he'd be available for the Bengals at that point in the draft, but that's one name I want to kind of look more into in the future. But when we come back, we're going to talk more about.
It's not his son, by the way. I thought it was.
Oh, so you fact checked that?
I fact checked it live time. It's
wow.
Not his
Okay.
Son. His father was a former lawyer and retired airline employee turned franchisee in the pizza and check cashing businesses. Congratulations to Andre Sr.
Forgive me, the other Andre Carter. Forgive me if you're hearing this. When we come back, we're going to talk more about the interior rush, what that looks like, what needs to get better, and much more right here on the Strictly Stripes podcast.
Hey there, it's Muhammad Ahmad from the Strictly Stripes podcast. You might be wondering, what exactly is Cincinnati Football Insider? Well, it's a community of fans who want the inside scoop on the Bengals and a direct connection to the Strictly Stripes podcast and the reporters who cover the team, and that would be me, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Neislick. It works like this. Andrew, Mike, and I will text your phone a few times a day with breaking news analysis, and our insights on the Bengals. It's the inside scoop on what we're hearing, and we'll give you the inside word before it even hits social media. Being an insider is the best way to participate with the podcast and get in on special events and Zoom calls with me, Mike, and Andrew. And the best part is you can text us directly. It's a great way to cut through the clutter of Facebook, Twitter, other social media, and avoid the trolls for just $4.99 a month. Still not sure? Well, just try it for 2 weeks, and if you don't like it, you can text the word STOP at any time, but you won't want to cancel once you join the community of hardcore Bengals fans. Here's the best way to get on board. Go to cleveland.com/Bengals, click on the blue banner at the top of the page, or if it's easier, text 513-940-4193. It's a great time to try the 2 weeks free, as we'll be reporting live from the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. Plus, we'll be covering free agency on the way to the NFL Draft in April. Give us a try for 2 weeks and see what you think. Just text this number again. It's 513-940-4193 and become an insider today.
And thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. So with the interior rush guys, I want to start with DJ Reader because as we've mentioned on this podcast and even going into today, he's in a contract year. This is the last year on his deal, and he's not a cheap one. I mean, he's making about $15 million going into next season. Obviously what sucked for him and the Bengals is he missed 7 games. The impact was very noticeable, especially when, you face Lamar Jackson in prime time, you face Nick Chubb in prime time. And those guys, I mean, for the most part, at least Nick Chubb definitely ran all over the Bengals. Then he comes in, and you'd think this guy's a defensive back with how many passes he swatted. Swatted about 3 or 4 in his first 2 or 3 games back. With just the games that we saw him play, those 9 or 10 games, I guess because they didn't play the Bills, the 9 games they played in the regular season, he played in the regular season. Did he prove that he really is one of the best run stoppers? And where can he improve as a pass rusher? Because he did not have any sacks this year.
Well, I think he was disruptive in the pass game. For defensive tackles, it's different. And I think you see what the numbers were when he was out. Both the pass rush and the run defense took a hit. I think they averaged opposing offenses averaged 25 yards more per game. Obviously, they had a couple of bad games against the run, including that New Orleans game where Reader was out. So I think you saw his impact just based on his absence. He's a guy where you don't necessarily worry, like Andrew said, about specific sack numbers, just how disruptive he was, and he was disruptive when he was in the lineup. And then obviously his run stopping numbers were among the best, most effective in terms of stop percentage, plays he blew up kind of by himself, in the top, I think 10 in the league according to Pro Football Focus, averaged about two per game. So I mean, yeah, and then also the kind of the heart and soul, obviously, of the defense. You wonder how healthy he was. He was on a kind of load management plan after that injury with the knee. So you kind of hope that with that, getting back to 100% now with the full off season, he could be more effective, even better next year. Just not having have that injury.
Yeah, and I mean with Reader, you saw when he was out, it's not exactly a one-to-one position swap from the defensive tackle position that he plays and the defensive tackle position that BJ Hill plays. It's a different type of defensive tackle spot, more interior play. You get taken on more double teams, and it takes a specific type of defensive tackle to do that. Like Mike said, you're not exactly looking at the numbers when that comes around. You're not going to say that, well, he only had X hits or whatever. I mean, the more quarterback hits, the more sacks you can get, the more the merrier. But you're not really going to focus on that a ton. I think it's funny. We were talking about, maybe the plays there, but the production is not for Hubbard and Hendrickson, but I don't think it really matters for Reader. I mean, he's really good. If you believe in Pro Football Focus, he was one of the better run defenders in the league. Put himself in a category of Cameron Hayward, Quinnen Williams, Dexter Lawrence, Aaron Donald, Chris Jones. Those are the 5 guys that he was behind. He's right in there with DeForest Buckner and Derek Brown and Jeffrey Simmons and Jonathan Allen. So that's the company he keeps. So, I mean, it's hard to ask for a ton more from Reader, but I do think you need to start thinking about a post-Reader world, because you got a guy who's making $15 million in 2023. I don't know how much you want to be paying a guy or a defensive tackle $15 million when Joe Burrow is making 50, and is T. Higgins here? Is Jamar Chase here? You're going to have to make some decisions about how you want to construct your roster, and he's going to be one of them.
And let's be fair, I mean, for as well as he's playing, he's closer to the age of 30. And I think at that point, at least for defensive tackles, especially with how much he's been through physically, like, you can't see a drop-off there. So do the Bengals want to pay for that and invest in that long-term? I don't know. I honestly doubt it. But to that point, I mean, you plan for a post-Reader world. How much do you also plan for a post-BJ Hill world? Because he's only got 2 years left on his deal, and he actually has a potential out going into 2024. So if the Bengals wanted to save $7 million going into 2024, they could release him after next year because he's up there in age 2. He's about a year younger than Reader. I mean, just in general, not just with Reader and Hill, but like at the defensive tackle position, how much do you invest in that, and how much more of a priority is that than the edge rusher position like we talked about earlier?
Well, you hear offensive coordinators talk about this a lot, where interior pressure is really, really devastating to what an offense can do. You can kind of, even if it is a Myles Garrett, there are things that you can do to scheme around that. Becomes a lot more difficult, as the Bengals found out and the Bengals saw firsthand in the AFC title game, when you have a guy who's really driving back one of your guards or one of your centers. Like, if it's happening on the interior, it's a really difficult thing. So it's a luxury for sure, but I don't know if it's a position that you can invest in significantly in free agency. I mean, we can get into this in a way later conversation, but my philosophy is you need as many draft picks as possible if you're going to pay a quarterback. And like Mike said, you kind of run out of options. You run out of like significant draft capital to use a player or to use on a player. But I don't know if defensive tackle is a position that, if you're going to pay, if next year you go into the year, you're going to pay Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard a combined $27 million. BJ Hill's making another 10. You're going to invest a first round pick in a defensive tackle after that. That feels like a lot. That feels like a lot of investment going into defensive tackles. So this to me feels like you can miss some mid-round picks, and you need some development from some of your younger guys, because I'm not sure that you're going to be able to afford all of it. And I mean, afford all of it with real dollars and afford all of it with actual draft picks.
Yeah, I
agree.
With that,
it's just
go ahead.
You're running out of money, running out of draft picks. I mean, they don't have any extra picks this year. So they're in a bit of a bind to try to reload that defensive line. You might be looking at trying to get, if you're looking for depth, a veteran that kind of gets cut late that might be, get a deal. I mean, those are some of the things they'll have to consider at both spots to try to be savvy, because they don't have an unlimited budget and don't have tons of picks. Only got the 7.
And I mean, really, you talk about depth behind, Reader and Hill. You have Zach Carter, the rookie out of Florida, who, I mean, he played all those games and started when Reader was out with that knee injury. I don't think he was bad. I think he has a lot of growth that he has to have, but he started showing that, I think, in the second half of the year when he became more of a rotational player. I mean, he played in the playoffs too, and I think he was as effective as he needed to be, although I think he needs to be more effective if the Bengals want to lean in on him in the future. If, like you said, they don't have much draft capital, if they want to look at him and say, we want to put more stock into Zach Carter, that's going to have to happen. But I think it will. I think he has a good ceiling with where they drafted him in the 3rd round. But then you have Jay Tufele, who they got off waivers. I don't think that's something you want long term. I think that's more of a depth piece. And then you have Josh Tupou, who, for as long as he's been in Cincinnati, he's actually been there since 2017. Even then, he almost never really plays, because his first sack, which was on Tua Tagovailoa in prime time, that was his first ever career sack, and he's been there since the Marvin Lewis era. So it's just one of those tough things where, like, how much do you rely on Zach Carter? Where do you go on the draft? Like, how late do you get a diamond in the rough? And I mean, to kind of tie all this up, like, what are some maybe diamonds in the rough that the Bengals could get, in later rounds where you get someone for cheap and they might actually develop into someone good that you can rely on in the future? Like, basically, is there another Zach Carter that you think that they could get somewhere later in the draft that you guys maybe have been thinking about?
I mean, in terms of like the diamond in the rough guy that you're like, okay, that's hard to say. I don't know if I have a name for you there. In terms of, who you could get in the mid to late rounds and say like, okay, this guy can immediately contribute. It's kind of hard to predict those things, which I think just kind of goes back into Mike and I's point where it's okay. Look, like this is a matter of capital that you have both money and with picks, and the hit rate on 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round picks is not great. I'm not saying they don't happen, where you get a guy in this 5th round, 6th round who comes in and plays, but the odds that player is going to play are lower, and the odds that guy is going to become a significant starter are even lower than that. So it's kind of hard to predict, who a diamond in the rough could be in the 5th round or the 6th round, because if you are getting to the 5th or the 6th round, there is I don't want to say something wrong with you, but there is a flaw with your game that scouts and coaches have seen, because otherwise you would be higher up. Maybe you played at a school that's Division II or FCS, or maybe you were injured, or maybe you're undersized, or whatever it is. There's something that people are scared of if you're lasting until the 5th or the 6th round.
Well, and I don't know. I think diamond in the rough for Zach Carter is. I don't know that he's a diamond yet.
I'm not saying
diamond,
he is. I'm saying,
like
is there
starter.
a diamond who might be better than him per se? Like, that's what I meant to say.
Okay. I just, a little confused there. So, that's hard to do. But like I said, I view it as a little bit of opposite, in terms of what they need on the defensive line. I wouldn't be looking for a diamond in the rough. I'd be looking for just a straight diamond. So, I think you need contributors now. You're not necessarily, you got to worry about depth in the future, but this is a Super Bowl contending team. You got to make this final push to get you over the hump. And if it's another pass rusher, another guy in interior that makes more of a difference, you got to try to make it work.
Right. I think, that's a tough one. I mean, I can't really think of any that comes to mind right away, because the names I'm thinking of would be more like your 1st to 4th round picks. I haven't really thought much beyond that, but that's just hard to say, because I think, to be honest, like if they're going to get anybody at that position, it'd have to be somewhere in those, might have to be that 3rd or 4th round. Because like Mike said, I agree. Like, you're a Super Bowl contending team that wants to win now. Like, it's not the worst thing in the world to get a project, but you had that with Joseph Osai, and now he's kind of getting there. Same with Cam Sample. I think with this position in particular, you want someone who can just kind of jump right in. And maybe they don't focus on that as much now. They focus more in 2024. As crazy it is to believe that that's almost a year away, but I think that's something you can't worry too much about, but you have to prioritize at the same time, as paradoxical as it sounds. To kind of just wrap up here, I mean, I'm just curious on your all's thoughts about this. I don't think we've ever talked about this, and I really don't know what you guys think of this, but how do you guys feel about the XFL? Like, did you watch any XFL football this weekend? I've just been like itching to ask you guys that. I mean, what do you think? How do you feel about it?
I did.
Are you a fan?
I'm not proud of it, but I did. Well, because there were some games Saturday, and that was during the slam dunk contest, so that obviously took my attention. Shout out Mac McClung for not forcing me to watch XFL football. I watched some of the DC Defenders game last night. That's not great football. I was kind of watching that, and the thing that I texted my friends was, if an average Power 5 school played, like I used Maryland. I was like, if Maryland played the DC Defenders, what's that score? Like, and I think Maryland beats them up really bad. Like, it's not great football. So they tried, like, I didn't see it, but there was something where it was like the Battle Hawks, I think is what they're called, from Seattle or St. Louis. No, not Seattle. St. Louis. I think they're St. Louis.
I couldn't tell you.
They had like a 3-point conversion, which I thought was interesting. They did the 4th and 15 thing that I think the Ravens and maybe the Patriots have been on for a while in terms of onside kicks. Like, instead of an onside kick, you just take the ball at your own 20 and it's 4th and 15, and there you go. So I missed all of that, but it's we'll was not great. It was not it was an entertaining viewing experience. One of my friends texted me and said it was like watching a football game version of The Office. So,
Oh my gosh.
it was not great. It was not great.
What was that? Why is that? Well, I don't understand that comparison.
Because everything was kind of like gimmicky. They like showed the fans in DC like trying to like do the beer snake thing where you like put your empty cups and you try to like stretch it from the front row to the last row. There was just a lot of like weird plays in the game where like you could just tell it was not very high quality football. Everything was very like it felt very like slapsticky. I hope it gets better, but I mean you're talking about the quarterback for who did they play? I forget who they played. The Sea Dragons, I think was their name. It was Ben DiNucci, former JMU guy who played for the Cowboys, and then who was the Jordan Teamu, I think is his name. He was the quarterback for DC. So it's like you're not dealing with quarterbacks it's not a feeder pipeline to the NFL, which is what I think these leagues kind of want to be, and I just don't think that's ever going to happen.
I'm just gonna be
I did
blunt
not
and
watch
say,
a minute of it. I
What's
did not
that?
watch any. I said I didn't watch a minute of it. So
Good for
Neither
you.
did I.
You saved
Neither did I.
yourselves. You saved yourselves.
I mean, to each their own. To those who enjoy it, good for you. But we have the NFL. We have college football. I'm just content. I don't have anything against it. I'm just content. You can call me complacent, call me whatever you want. I'm just content with what we've got. And we hope you're content with everything on this podcast. Again, as we mentioned in the ad earlier, make sure you subscribe to I can't even talk today. Cincinnati Football Insider. Again, it's going to be one of the best investments you'll make. And stay tuned with us tomorrow. We're going to continue our defensive positional reviews. It's going to be a lot of fun, as it has been the past week. But once again, for myself, Andrew Gillis and Mike Nizik, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. Have a Tuesday.